Hello and welcome to another edition of the UK Column Live. I will be here hosting today on Friday the 16th of November, and I'm here with Brian. How are you doing today?
Extremely well,
I'm sure,
as we'll see.
I'd imagine you're very pleased today.
Yeah, some smiles in the UK Column studio today.
The weather is, I did just check outside actually, and the weather is typically overcast and dull, but not here in the studio, and I hope not at home with you. Brian, what are we starting with today?
Well, we're going to start with some serious topic. This is the funeral procession for Royal Marine Corporal David O'Connor, which took place in Havant, Hants, and the papers are of course reporting on the number of people, more than 1,000 line the streets. So this is another tragic death of a Royal Marine killed in Afghanistan whilst on patrol in Helmand province, and of course this highlights the fact that the deaths continue in this senseless war. I think that's the only way I can describe it. But at the moment we're still not really seeing the wider public gripping the issue. Now, interestingly enough, the Telegraph today is reporting Paddy Ashdown. I've got to say he's got a little bit of a checkered career, I believe, in whether he's for peace in the world or he's been a little bit outspoken in some areas in going the other way. But in this case, he's saying that we've failed in Afghanistan and should pull out immediately. It's crystal clear that the war in Afghanistan has been lost, and continuing to fight is not worth the life of another serviceman. Well, I think we would totally agree with that here. But of course, what we really should be looking at is why we got involved in the war in the first place and who's responsible, and are we going to bring these people to account? Now, ANU website in America produced some very interesting articles and indeed images, and I think these are really the things that should be appearing on mainstream news, because here we've got Tony Blair being shown with his tremendous efforts in Iraq, and this website is really not pulling any punches because they have a photograph here of Tony Blair with blood on his hands. And of course in the early days mainstream media people were saying this is the case. Have you got blood on your hands, Tony Blair? Well, of course this man is still at large. We still see the horrific scenes going on in Iraq. We see the horrific scenes in Libya. We're seeing the deaths, not only, of course, of British servicemen and women in Afghanistan, but also hundreds and thousands of the local population. It's very significant that if you look for pictures of civilian casualties in Afghanistan on Google, you come out with page after page of military action, but almost nothing on what's happening to the local people. And our view is that really it's time that alternative media and the corporate media start to focus on really who is guilty for these thousands of deaths. Yep. So we give our condolences to the family of yet another Royal Marine killed, but really what we need to be doing and what the British public need to be doing are starting to bring the people responsible for this international violence to book.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an insult, isn't it, really, for every family that has had to suffer the death of anybody, whether it was in the army or whether it's a victim, like an innocent victim in Afghanistan. It's an insult because, you know, both wars, whether we're talking about Iraq or Afghanistan, they've all been built on the back of liberation and democracy, when in reality there are actually ulterior motives for going in there. I remember reading or researching about 3 years ago, it's going to be a lot more now, but it was $124 billion industry, the poppy industry, coming out of Afghanistan. That was three years ago. What it is now, I have no idea. It's probably a bit more.
Because we know for a fact, and we have troops from Afghanistan confirming this, that of course the poppy fields are not being destroyed. They're actually being protected.
Protected and maintained, and we've got pictures and video evidence of it. I mean, it's just... I just find it really insulting. It's insulting because the people that are perpetrating this will stand up and say, oh, they'll stand up in the House of Commons and they will give honours, rightly so, to the people that have been killed. but they're empty words.
It's tokens.
It's tokens. It's empty words because they're not being truthful. Because really, truthfully, the army is there for the benefit of a very small few.
An elite. We're talking about
elite.
The corrupt elite, whether they're in UK or the US of A.
Yep. Well, I think it surpasses nationality, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, this independent article follows on from it, Syria, which you've been having a little look at in the paper, I think.
I had a little look today in the paper because there are two very interesting stories that I'm particularly interested in. One is the rocket attack that was made on, I just have to get the name right here because I'm not very good with the names, Ahmad Jabari, which was he is the Palestinian organization's Hamas military wing, and he was a target by, not by Mossad, but by Shin Bet, which is the domestic equivalent. So that is what Israel is basically using as a back off to anybody who is threatening Israel or is suggesting that if Israel was to attack another country around that area, that they better not, because that's what happens to military leaders who do that. And of course, there has been more fighting between Hamas and between Israel. In the form of rockets. Basically, there was another attack yesterday, and it's basically been spread all over the papers. I personally feel that it's a little bit more kind of propaganda towards the sway towards Israel, because the text is very loaded. It kind of makes you feel that if you're coming at it from a sort of a perspective where you're not used to dealing with a lot of information around this area, you would side with Israel and you would think, why are the Palestinians killing all these innocent people? Well, I think if you take a people and you lock them into a particular part of the land
for 3 years,
for 3 years, you don't let anything in or out. You completely take away their rights. You treat them like animals. Is it any wonder that they retaliate? But of course, when they retaliate, they're the terrorists. You know.
Well, and on the borders, we've got, of course, the Syrian situation, and just to comment on this slide before we bring it down, we've got William Hague now pushing the negotiations with the so-called Free Syrian Army. So we've got David Cameron, who has declared that his loyalty, his unshakable loyalty, is to Israel. That is David Cameron. That's an accurate quote. His words. We've now got David Cameron and William Hague moving in to arm the rebel forces in Syria to depose Assad. And of course, we're already seeing the friction across the border with Israel.
Yeah. Well, there was a National Security Council yesterday in which they were looking at areas in which they could rip up that embargo, so that they could send in military equipment and surface to air missiles, so that they could combat Syria's Air Force. Yeah.
Well, of course, there's never any money in Britain for the things that we need, such as education or the NHS or our roads, but there's always money available for David Cameron and Blair's and Brown's wars, and of course there's always money available for the banking industry. And I think, Mike, you've spotted something here in the Telegraph about a mere 66 billion.
Well, the 66 billion was the bailout that RBS and Lloyds got. And what various people are saying is that the UK may never recover that 66 billion. And my answer to that really is, what a surprise. I hope that came across, that was dripping with sarcasm. But, you know, the fact of the matter is the banks are bankrupt. We've said it before, we'll say it again. The banks are bankrupt. We are not going to recover the £66 billion that we put into that banking black hole in order to stop RBS and Lloyds going bankrupt, fully bankrupt in 2007, 2008. The solution for this is to put these bankrupt organisations into administration and get them sorted out. But of course that isn't going to happen. We're just going to keep pouring more and more money in. But what was quite interesting was that in the Telegraph article here, Margaret Hodge, who's the MP for Barking, and you do wonder whether she is, said that the way the Treasury's management of the Northern Rock sale, the way that they managed the Northern Rock sale, raises fears about how their managing other things. These sales as well, the potential sales later on of these banks. The lack of competition, she says, does not fill us with confidence that the taxpayer will make a profit. Again, she's pretending not to appreciate that the banking system as a whole is a cartel. We'll say it again, it is a cartel. And so it's got nothing to do, there is no competition in the banking sector, and the solution is not in more competition in the banking sector, it's about reorganising the banking sector.
Yeah, and of course we're just not getting the truth about this issue out. At the moment we've got the situation where MPs can't ask questions about the Bank of England on the floor of the House. We've got George Osborne simply not telling the public what the true situation is. We're creating money out of nothing when we need it for wars, but we can't use it to assist the country. So it seems to me that the whole of the dialogue around the banking industry at the moment is either a lie or a smokescreen.
Indeed, and I mean, as far as the Bank of England is concerned, they have major exemptions within the Freedom of Information Act, so actually it's almost impossible to get information out of that institution.
Yeah.
Sounds like another central bank in Europe. It's a similar sort of ethic and method, doesn't it? You can't ask questions, you can't take action, you can't prosecute.
Well, if you're creating a dictatorship, you've got to do it properly, of course,
This is
true. You know, step by step. But of course, no money for education, no money for skills training, which is pointed out from This Is Money.
Right, this is an offshoot of the Daily Mail, and I wanted to highlight a couple of points from this particular article. He is quite rightly pointing out that our skills base is disappearing because the people with the skills are either beginning to retire or beginning to die, and that there are no skilled young people to replace these people that are retiring and dying. That on a long-term basis, this is absolutely dire for the British economy. Again, we've been saying this for a long, long time, and I'm glad to see some people catching up. And one of the other points that he made was he highlighted the recent Ofgem, which is the energy regulators, a report from them pointing out that in 2015, which is only in 2.5 years' time or 2 years' time, Britain is going to have to switch off quite a proportion of our power stations, coal and oil-based power stations, because EU regulations say that unless we have a fully implemented carbon capture and storage solution in place, that they cannot continue to function. And we have no capacity to replace that generating capacity within the next 2 years, no capability to do that. It's not possible. So he's highlighting that. And he's saying we've got to make, so he's talking about careers in real industry, real economy careers. He's saying we've got to make these careers as attractive as being a merchant banker, but this won't work unless we have the right teachers. Well, I totally disagree with that, the second part of that statement. We have the right teachers, but they're not allowed to teach. The policy denies them the right to teach in an effective way. They're spending so much time processing red tape that they don't get a chance to actually teach. But the other key point that he said there is we've got to make these careers as attractive as being a merchant banker. Unfortunately, we have such a campaign within the corporate media at the moment to glorify celebrity and money for money's sake, that people are increasingly being attracted towards the places where they feel that they can get the easiest money, and becoming a merchant banker is in the City of London employee with their massive bonuses and their massive fat cat salaries. This is what's attracting people, rather than doing something actually of benefit to society or of benefit to the country. So you know, it's not about having the right teachers, it's about having the right attitude to being an inhabitant of a nation state, and that's something that is being actively destroyed. That ideal is being actively destroyed within the corporate media.
Well, actively destroyed, and also it's running to a programme, because the agenda at the moment is to collapse the economy of the UK. Yep. There's no question that this is happening so that we can be fully subsumed into the federal European state. So
yeah, and I think it's evidenced, you know, by the fact that we've known for a while that we have to decommission those power stations, but nothing has been done. And yet you would think that aside from food and water and shelter and health, that energy should be the next most important thing for a society.
Well, sorry to interrupt. We've been building a lot of windmills, of course, haven't we? So,
of course.
You know, the priority has clearly been on let's install something which is clearly not capable of meeting the nation's energy needs, while we actually neglect the real thing. And of course, the UK technical nuclear power skill base has been completely destroyed and undermined, and now we're having to say, well, we need to bring in the Japanese or the French in order to build our power stations. What an insult to the skilled workers in this country.
Yeah, I agree. And it's happening on the forefront of pretty much each industry, where skill sets are being debased, major powers and corporations are conglomerating, and you know, we're starting to see the big powers emerge now. I think you guys were talking about Serco yesterday. They're another good example. I've been talking about Cargill. It's another good example of these massive power bases which are now starting to merge and actually really start to be quite a threat, I think.
Yes. Okay, what to do about it? We need the public to speak out, to write letters, to demand action, and simply withdraw consent when you don't like what is happening. The time's really come for speaking out.
Yeah, I think so.
Of course, if you speak out in some directions now in UK, you're going to come up against a tough response. The Independent flagging up here that Lord McAlpine is going to pursue claims over sex abuse slurs. And we know, of course, that the BBC has rushed into a £185,000 settlement. What I find particularly interesting is that the BBC's agreed to this libel payout in the timescale. There doesn't seem to have been any proper investigation into what actually the Newsnight team were looking at. And I know that many people at the moment are saying, well, if Mesham didn't actually name Lord McAlpine, why is this offer being made, and why is licence fee, so public money, being used actually to pay this man off? He certainly looks fairly happy in this photograph here. He's got a smile on his face. This is what Lord McAlpine had to say. I've been conscious that any settlement will be paid by the licence fee payers and have taken that into account in reaching agreement with the BBC, he added. We will now be continuing to seek settlements from other organisations that have published defamatory remarks and individuals who have used Twitter to defame me. So there's a couple of points here, but of course he said, well, the damage has been done because the remarks have gone worldwide all over the internet. That being the case, then he could have taken, say, a token £10,000 from the licence fee payers, because it wasn't the licence fee payers that actually committed the crime. Surely the people ultimately responsible must be the BBC trustees, of which Tory Patton is sitting at the top. So my view on this is that the BBC has rushed into a settlement in order to actually cover up what was and was not discovered during the investigations.
I think it's a bit like a microcosm of our kind of political spectrum, because the BBC can do whatever they like, and it doesn't matter because the TV licence fee payers are picking up the bill. And it's the same with the government. It doesn't matter really what they do, because if they make a mistake, it's the taxpayer that pays. It's always the man at the bottom, you know. It's always us, the sort of working class, the kind of middle class people that end up paying the bill. But yet these people are able to make the same mistakes time and time and time again in different positions, where they disappear and then re-emerge in another position. And it is always the licence fee payers and always the taxpayer that picks
Well, of course, Lord Patton is a great chum of David Cameron, so if you have one of your chums there, Prime Minister helps the decision-making process. Presumably you can do what you like.
Yeah.
But of course we note that Lord McAlpine used a top London solicitor, RMPI, RPMI, whichever way it is. They're very good on compensation and have got a click here to claim now button to see how much compensation you're entitled to. So I'm sure they're doing a very good job for him. But if we move on to this issue of the tweeting, This is getting extremely interesting now that people who simply passed on information over the internet are now coming into the frame, and this is the point that Mike has been raising over the last couple of days, that is this, are we seeing something engineered here in order to get the state starting to chase the users of Twitter, control over Facebook, control over Twitter? Do you want to add something on that, Mike?
Well, I absolutely believe that this whole McAlpine thing has been engineered in order to get at Facebook and Twitter. I think it's interesting that Mesham's the allegations that came out about McAlpine as a result of what Mesham said. He didn't name McAlpine, but when the Newsnight thing hinted at that, various people were tweeting comments like McAlpine is trending, but they didn't say McAlpine is a paedophile. They didn't defame McAlpine. They merely reported the fact that something was happening on Twitter, and Sally Berko was a case in point, and she's been singled out here as being the picture girl of the anti-Twitter campaign.
A big name.
Yes. So it wasn't that people were saying this man is a paedophile and we're defaming him. This is a very dangerous thing. If he therefore takes people to court saying that people defamed him by reporting on something which was happening, his name was trending. If we then say that is a form of defamation, that you can no longer report an event because that is defamation, that is a very dangerous step, I believe. But the other thing that we should remember, of course, is this wasn't the first allegation against McAlpine, and he didn't sue Scallywag magazine in the 1990s, as we've said before. So why is he suddenly choosing to sue now? I believe this is because this is about Twitter and Facebook and not about McAlpine at all, actually.
And it links in very nicely with what's going on with Leveson, I think, because at the end of the day, we have libelous laws, we have vexatious laws, we have laws to deal with people who make claims that are not true. And so I think you're absolutely right. They're these scenarios are being used to attack groups that have become very dangerous because it allows the freedom of information to pass very quickly. And I think that's the bottom line, really.
Well, if we bring up this one, this is another part of the very muddy waters around the BBC, because a gentleman called Ken McQuarrie has been compiling a report into the Newsnight programme that mistakenly implicated Lord McAlpine in child sex abuse. And it's now being pointed out that basically that report didn't actually bother to speak to Newsnight's political editor, Allegra Stratton, and she'd refused to take part in the broadcast because she wasn't happy with the quality of what was going on. But what's being pointed out here in this in the comments to that Telegraph article is, here's the BBC saying that it's conducting investigations, but it's now known that the BBC hasn't even spoken to some of the key people who were involved with that Newsnight programme. And of course this lady is of great interest because she was expressing concerns about what was going on. So what is the BBC up to here? They've rushed into an agreement with Lord McAlpine. They haven't conducted the full inquiries properly. And I think as we're going to move on now to Leveson, the whole of this McAlpine thing with the BBC needs to be seen against the background of the Leveson inquiry. Yeah. And I think the Daily Mail is going to get the bunch of flowers today because the Mail has clearly been picking up on what's been happening. This is just part of the Mail's paper today. We had a copy of it somewhere. I think it's
sorry, I do apologise. Actually,
it's okay.
I have the front page here, so I'm just going to read a story from it.
If I just hold this up, this is the Daily Mail today, but it's got about 8 pages inside, focusing on Leveson and, of course, this gentleman here, Sir David Bell. Sir David Bell been of great interest to the UK column now for several years due to his involvement not only in Common Purpose, but his increasing involvement in the Media Standards Trust and the Leveson inquiry. And it seems that the Mail has really started to get to grips with this. So part of their press today was disturbing questions over Leveson's key advisor, special investigation into a central figure in the McAlpine scandal, and the judicial inquiry into the press. And what the Mail is quite rightly pointing out is that David Bell has been sitting on the Leveson inquiry panel. He's also been sitting as a chairman of the Media Standards Trust. He stood down temporarily to get into Leveson, but nevertheless the Media Standards Trust was hammering for an investigation into the mainstream press and media. And then, of course, the damning evidence which is coming out in the Mail is that Sir David Bell also involved with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which was the body which was pushing the information forward over the alleged abuse by Lord McAlpine. So we've got a key figure intimately involved with Lord Leveson, putting himself forward as a guru on media standards and honest reporting. And what the Mail is now pulling out in great detail is this man appears to not only be mucky, but he's in a very mucky pond as well. I'll just add a bit more to that because there's pages of this. Solved, the mystery of the money chest, how David Bell sits on the charity bankrolling his own campaign. And for the first time, what we're seeing in the mainstream press is the right questions being asked about these mysterious trusts and foundations who are funding all manner of things, funding Demos, the extreme left-wing think tank, beloved of the Labour Party in particular, but also we've got the Media Standards Trust, we've got the Hacked Off campaign, and when we look in the background we're seeing names like Lord Sainsbury and Rothschild, etc. Yep. And of course it's been particularly dirty. It's very interesting, they're using the term here, the people who know best dark arts and links with masters of spin. What the Mail is referring to here is terminology which is used in Julia Middleton's book, Beyond Authority. If you get into this book, you will find that she's indeed talking about getting a fifth column into the establishment to undermine political policy or to change political policy. And she's using some very disturbing language because she says in the book that basically if people challenge what they're doing, that you're either going to steamroller over them or you're going to undermine them or you're going to discredit them. So here is the book with the Chief Executive of Common Purpose, who of course the UK column's been reporting on for years, and this lady's policy is now being entwined with a move to try and control the press. So what's your view, Mike? And I know that you had some thoughts on the mainstream press beginning to work out that something was not right.
Well, on I think it was Monday or Tuesday, all the mainstream press or corporate press editors were in Belfast they were in Belfast for some kind of editors meeting, and I don't remember exactly what the details of that were. But it seems that they get together from time to time to discuss the state of the industry, and I find it interesting that this has come out within days of that meeting. So I guess there must be an awareness within the industry that really their backs are against the wall here, and unless they come out fighting, I suppose they're going to lose a lot of the freedom that they've got.
Yeah. What do you think?
I agree. But one thing I wanted to add about the series of articles that was in the Mail today was that I can't remember specifically the name of the gentleman who was talking about it, but what he was saying was that the whole Media Standards Trust sort of mission to attack the media was talked about at a soiree in 2003 with some, and again I don't recall the names, they're all in the articles, people can go and check that themselves, but there's some very prominent names that were at that meeting. And what I wanted to highlight was that really is how the world moves, that's how it motivates, is that there are people who are linked to various people who have got some very strong and high connections. They meet in secret places, which is generally their living rooms or their halls, depending on the
or the British Embassy in Paris, depending on how you deal with Britain's strategic defence policy.
Absolutely, depends how grandiose your position is, absolutely. But they meet in these positions very quietly, very secretly. They make decisions. I mean, this was back in 2003 that they made this decision to attack the media, and here we are 9 years later. So that's taken a lot of planning, and it's taken a lot of I don't know how to put that diplomatically, scheming. It's taken a lot of scheming,
common purpose.
and this is where we are. So I really liked how the article or the series of articles in the Mail really highlighted that, and I thought I think that's brilliant, and a big tip of the hat to the Daily Mail, because I think that other than the UK column, I've never seen such a really good breakdown of the details of
we're allowed to hold it up. I think this is just one of our headlines. We'll bring it up on the main screen. But the UK column, and I'm going to say it's not just the UK column team, because across the country there have been many people digging into Common Purpose. They have done excellent work, and of course we know that at the moment there are still issues with court cases going on due to do with freedom of information and whether members of the public can lever out names. So we've got this organisation, Common Purpose, clearly working in the sort of meeting that you're describing, and basically they won't release the names. Just if people are interested, by all means buy the Mail and have a look and see what the Mail is saying. But if you want to look in detail at the articles that the UK column has written over the last few years, use this web link and it will take you right through to a comprehensive list of the articles that we've written. So that's all on the UK column website. What we thought we would do, just keeping a little eye on the time, but is give you an overview of the key people that really in the firing line at the moment, and the Mail, some incredibly detailed reporting. Here is Sir David Bell, stood down recently as chair of the Media Standards Trust, but he's only stood down whilst he's working for Lord Leveson. And here he is as chairman of the Common Purpose trustees. This is his #1 officer, Julia Middleton, the chief executive. Of course, not only is she driving Common Purpose, but she's been heavily involved with the Media Standards Trust, the very same organisation that has been pushing for control of the press. If we move on a step, we've got to come to this gentleman, Francis Maude. Now, Francis Maude has consistently refused to tell the truth about what Common Purpose has been doing in the high-level Cabinet Office leadership meetings. And we know, as one example, that minutes of a major meeting were fiddled. That means that they were fraudulently changed in order to hide the fact that Sir David Bell was present in the meeting when they were discussing giving contracts to Common Purpose for the training of the top 200 civil servants. And I believe that the Mail article gives some indication of that. What the Mail article is still not picking up on, neither is the rest of the mainstream press, is of course Francis Maude is also running the behavioural change programme for the Tories. This is the applied behavioural psychology, where we're going to try and influence how people think and behave. And of course, if you're going to follow through that sort of policy, you are going to want total control of the media to get your propaganda programme through. This is a very dangerous man, in our opinion. This is Sir Bob Kerslake, who missed his name off, probably appropriate because he's hiding there in the dark. But Sir Bob Kerslake, who's come in from Sheffield, a city riddled with corruption, as has been reported by the UK column. And this man, who's a Common Purpose guru, is of course working in this little network that we see on screen in order to get over 200 civil servants to follow the Common Purpose agenda. Tony Blair, of course, correction, sorry, they are so similar. David Cameron, of course, right at the heart of this, as was Tony Blair, and particularly via the office of the Deputy Prime Minister. with Prescott, but Cameron's continued the common purpose, and of course he's intimately connected with all of the people driving this through. Beg your pardon, sorry, I'll just have to bring those up very quickly. This is the next man, of course, Tory Lord Patten, chairman of the BBC. So and also a common purpose supporter. So obviously we can't trust anything that the BBC is doing at the moment with regard to Lord Alpine or the investigation of paedophiles, or in fact wider reporting. And here is one of the key common purpose people who's been spinning some amazing stories over the economic situation and what the banks are up to. And of course, not only is he common purpose, but Robert Peston is also intimately involved with the Media Standards Trust. And that brings us on to the fact that the BBC has hundreds of common purpose graduates. Training has been paid for out of public money, but the licence payer is not allowed to know who those people are. So the secrecy in the British establishment at the moment, truly phenomenal. Okay, if we do one more article, and it's probably a very topical one. It's on the elected police commissioner. Either of you guys like to comment on this?
I don't really have much of a comment on the commissioner job role, other than I think it's completely unwarranted and unneeded, and it's merely a consolidation of power into one person. That's really how I see it. I don't have any other comment. Do you, Mike?
Well, of course, he's going to have a panel of people around him, but at this point, I can't remember which newspaper was asking this question, but one of the newspapers was asking how this panel is going to be appointed. It isn't. I noticed the word is appointed, not elected. So, whereas before we had councillors who are all elected on a committee, doing the same job as these so-called elected police commissioners. Now we have a single election for a single post, and that person appoints his team. So we're surely losing accountability here.
Yeah, well, this is big society model, isn't it? You talk about democracy, you talk about more power to the individual, but actually you're taking it away.
Yep.
Absolutely. And the other point is, of course, what was there, a 14 or 15% turnout for this? There is no democratic mandate for these positions and for the actions that these people take in the future. And I think it's time that we all start getting active in making sure we let our representatives know how we feel about these issues.
Yep. Well, of course, it's here in this article that the article actually says that Angus McPherson, a Conservative, became the first Police and Crime Commissioner today after taking the post in Wiltshire. The election has been blighted by a low turnout of just 14.68%. Now, of course, Cameron was bemoaning the fact that people aren't voting, but actually the thing has been set up to stop people voting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they don't know what they're voting for, therefore they don't vote. Therefore, what is happening is the commercialisation of the police. That's what I believe is happening, is now moving on apace.
Sorry, Mark, I was just going to say the other point about this whole election was, of course, how much does it cost to stand as an MP? £500 deposit. This, like the Mayor of London election, was several £1,000s deposit in order to stand. Of course, that puts off the average decent human being who doesn't have that isn't bankrolled by a political party from actually standing as an independent candidate.
Well, of course, the other thing they were using to screen candidates is if anybody had any form of criminal record, you couldn't stand, and yet the situation at the moment is that we have Westminster full of MPs who have all sorts of criminal records. So there's something very dirty going on here. If I'm allowed just one last article, I'll just bring it in very quickly. But the papers have been reporting on Britain's latest and greatest nuclear submarine, HMS Astute. Remember, this is the vessel that went aground off Scotland a little while ago. So one of 7 new submarines to be built at a cost of £9.75 billion. And what's being reported is that this vessel is suffering from a range of problems. So problems with top speed, flooding during a routine dive, corrosion in parts despite being new, and nuclear reaction monitoring instruments being the wrong type of lead, and that the periscope is flawed. These problems are much more significant than the niggles and glitches expected to arise during the working up a new class of nuclear power submarine. So there's something very funny going on at the moment. And of course, one of the things we could ask is what is actually happening with defence procurement as we're seeing it slide into the big corporatised commercial world where accountability is actually being removed. So,
do you mind? I've just got one thing I just wanted to address. I think it's really important.
Well, it's
very, very quickly.
UK column. There is no licence fee, so we can take up a little bit.
We
more
can do
time.
what we like. Brilliant. Because there's an article that's come out today about supermarkets that can basically bully suppliers and bully farmers, and they're not going to get any sort of repercussions from that. There's no fines, there's no penalties, and so forth. And I just wanted to flag this up because there is while all of this very important stuff, like the things that are going on in Israel, the things that's going on domestically, these things that are going on within the police, these are very, very important matters. But what is not being talked about enough, I don't think, is basically our food and who's buying it and who owns it. And at the moment, there is a massive movement between massive corporations like Monsanto and DuPont who are buying up our seed banks and our seed deposits, which is really, really important because your food comes from a seed. And if they control the seeds, they control your food. And this is just another movement of conglomeration between a few major corporations like Tesco's, Morrison's and Asda, who are basically going to control our food. And I know Mayer Amschel Rothschild once said, he who controls a currency controls a nation. Well, I would say he who controls the food controls the people. Because without food, we have nothing. And so I would urge people to get in touch with your minister, to basically put pressure on him or her to go into Parliament, to ask these very difficult questions, and to ensure that supermarkets and major conglomerations cannot take over our food. Because I think it's a matter of national security. That's how serious I think it is.
And I know you're going to be doing more on that in some of the more investigative programmes. So we apologise, or perhaps we don't, for overrunning. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please do have a look at what the Mail has got to say. We think it's very, very important. If we lose free press in Britain, we are fully into a dictatorship. So this is something that affects everything because we won't be able to report on what's happening with the food. Indeed. If the mainstream press and media in this country are so stupid as to allow themselves to be controlled by a cross-party agenda, by a corrupt and criminal government, we are in very serious times. If you want to do something about what's happening, then withdraw your consent, but let's start to get on the backs of our politicians and local representatives, and that means their phones should be ringing from first light to sunset or after. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you for watching.